You guys have actually known each other for almost 25 years.
We did the update.
Have your marriages lasted that long? Am I allowed to ask that? Or that's probably a sensitive way to start, isn't it?
Well, they have.
Oh, okay. Phew. Okay, that's good. Good. Well, let's start with, since we're talking about culture, how did you both meet? I presume it was PepsiCo, given your background.
It certainly was. We met about 25 years ago, and I think we've gotten to know each other pretty well over the years. But I would say, Stephen, our relationship has probably been built on some commonality. Stephen's been always very consumer-focused, been a brand builder, a great servant leader.
Is that what you sit and talk about at dinner, a great brand? But no, okay, I'm going to go to Stephen. What is
We
Stephen,
spend a lot of time talking about consumers and brands, I can tell you that.
Okay. But tell me a little more, tell me more about, when was the first time you ever saw Brian in the work setting, just out of curiosity?
Yeah, so the first time I saw him was at a meeting. I had come to PepsiCo through the acquisition of Quaker Gatorade, and it was a leadership meeting, and Brian was there, and like I told you in the back, I was like, I didn't think you would remember we actually met, because you were a senior guy, I was a junior guy, and we got to catch up for a bit, and that was the very first time I met Brian, and then I had the opportunity to work with Brian. He appointed me to a role, and the best advice he ever gave, he said, this is a turnaround, don't mess it up.
Them's fighting words. Anything you want to add, or can we go straight to the culture part now?
We met as part of a big acquisition.
Yeah.
So I had the pleasure
acquisition.
of leading the acquisition of Gatorade and Quaker for PepsiCo, and onboarding that team. And along with great brands, we get some great talent.
Often an acquisition is when you go through and you have to re-audition for your job, so that can create a bit of a tension. But we're going to talk about external culture, and we're also going to talk about internal culture, because obviously we're dealing with a business landscape that's quite fraught at the moment. But let's start with internal, because it's such a squishy concept, in all honesty. Like I don't know, raise your hand if you think culture doesn't matter. Okay, there you go. So you won us at hello on the importance of this. Define it for me. I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, I'll start, Diane. I think about my 40-year career. If I would have gone back in time, we would have been sitting here, and Stephen's probably in the same boat. We spent a lot of time talking about strategy and building capabilities and making sure we had great talent. But I think more and more you recognize the glue that keeps all of those together is culture. And at Target, we talk about culture all the time. We talk about a culture of care, a culture of growth, and a culture of winning together. And I would tell you, if I go back just a few years during the pandemic, that culture of care, and we talk about caring for each other, caring for our teams, the guests we serve, and communities, that kept the company moving forward. And it was a really important component. Growth is important. We like to grow the top line. But we also think it's important.
You would not be here if you did not.
No, we wouldn't.
I think growth is like a prerequisite for the job.
But I don't think we'd be here if we weren't growing talent as well.
Yeah.
And that's a big part of our culture.
How many? You've got 400,000
A little over
employees?
400,000 team members.
Top that, Stephen.
Can't top that. You know we're competitive. I can't top that. Even worldwide, PepsiCo is lower than that. We're about 320. My team, I have about.
You're more efficient, by the way. But go ahead.
Yeah, my team has about 75,000 team members. And if you think about it, culture is super important, and I agree with everything he said, particularly when you have a workforce that is distributed. Of our 70,000, 90% of those either make, move, or sell something. They're either in a factory, in a truck, in a distribution center, or in a store putting products on the shelf. And so being in touch with not just the management culture of the company, but the teammate culture of the company is important, and that's how you win. I spend a lot of time. In fact, I'm leaving today to go to Lynchburg, Virginia, where we have a site, and I'll spend day at site, day in the market, because if you're not in touch with the frontline culture in the company, you lose. So culture is how you win.
So I know we're going to talk about the partnership you have, which I think is quite interesting, and how you've aligned around culture. But let's talk about the external environment for a second. And Brian, I know you've been front and center of this. I was talking to somebody this morning, even about the effectiveness of the ads that ran in some of the swing states around trans, individuals and the threat that poses. You've felt that in a very visceral way, and I know PepsiCo has too, in terms of just how polarized the country is and how cancel culture and some of the other issues might even impinge on your values. How have you dealt with that?
We've tried to make sure we stay in step with the consumer and do the right things that are true to our brand. I mean, fundamentally, we try to bring joy to millions of guests who shop in our stores, either in-store or online every week, and being just true to who you are. And in an environment where there may be some tension, how do we become that joyful spot where people can say, all right, I can put all this aside and really just enjoy the moment, enjoy the shopping experience, the value, the newness we provide. So I think you've just got to be true to your brand and really stay in touch and in step with the consumer.
But do you have to be considerate to the fact that you're in blue states, red states? I mean, there are some consumers who, I really want to sort of capture that, because in essence, your culture is a very inclusive culture, both of you. We are in a country right now that half the country is hurting, half the country has different views of others. So I'd love to just hear a little more. And I'm going to go to you, Stephen, because you deal with this too in terms of, the influencers. You're both very much in touch with the consumer. What are you seeing and doing?
Yeah, well, we have the privilege to be in 94% of U.S. households. So we are everybody. And when you talk about the workforce, I'm in Perry, Georgia, our largest manufacturing site, and I'm in Cucamonga, outside Los Angeles. So you have very different work groups and very different consumer bases. It's the same. You have to be true to who you are. And so we have brands that speak differently to different consumer bases. We leverage those brands. From a employee base, I would tell you, we want PepsiCo to be a place that everybody can thrive. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, where you live, who you love. It doesn't matter. And if you can't reach your full potential here, then we're doing something wrong. And that's how we think about it.
And Diane, we've got almost 2,000 stores in all 50 states. We talked about almost 400,000 frontline team members. I say this all the time. They represent a cross-section of America. And they've got to feel like Target's a place where they can thrive and they can grow their careers. So you've got to find that through line. So
you've got to be, it means being considerate as well if somebody feels maybe offended at some things, maybe putting it a little bit aside. Let me ask you a question about how you work together, because now he certainly knows your name now because you're a vendor. But talk a little bit about, I think the nature of the partnership that you have actually goes deeper than most. So speak a little bit about that. I'll start with you.
Well, I think it gets back to some of the things I started with. Both of our companies, very consumer focused, very focused on managing brands. We're very true to our partnership to make sure it is that win-win. And it's part of our culture to make sure I don't treat Stephen and his team like they're a vendor. They're a partner. Right. We work together on strategy. We work together to make sure we've got the right differentiation in the marketplace. And we want to make sure we're both growing. But to grow, we've got to make sure we're taking care of the consumer.
Is there any friction here, or is this, it feels like there's a lot of love, but where are the pain points?
I don't think there's any friction. Here's what I would tell you. The best thing for me as I was growing in my career was getting to spend time on customer calls with Brian. All he talked about, the first thing he would do when he sat down, how are you seeing the customer? How are you seeing the consumer? Before, we weren't selling anything. It was really about getting to a joint understanding of the consumer and figuring out a way to build co-developed plans so you could win together. And he models that, and I would tell you he's one of the best at it on this side, and he is on the customer side as well. I mean, we have a lot of co-development together. He has a few. Such
as what would you co-develop? Well, obviously, I suppose, is there some special branded?
Yeah, absolutely. Like, popcorns, we're doing a specific item with them that we co-developed together. We had a meeting was that a month and a half ago, where we talked about standing up a build your own multi-pack, leveraging their online system. So we're doing things together that are significant and unique to the relationship.
But Diane, we do big things and small things together.
That's right.
I mean, PepsiCo and Target work the thing about, it's going to be Super Bowl season here soon. This is when our companies have to come together and make sure we really harness that big event. But Stephen talked about it. Regionalizing assortment, making sure market by market, we understand what's the mix going to look like to really connect with that local consumer.
Yeah.
So I think part of it's big, part of it's small.
That's right.
But we're always thinking about, all right, how do we serve that consumer?
Yeah.
Since you know your consumers so well, were you surprised by the election results? Because obviously the economists and the people in the polls found one thing. You're on the ground, you're talking to people. Did you sense that the country was moving a certain way? I'll
Well,
let whoever wants to take
I
that
don't think,
question.
I don't think either one of us want to be
among friends.
pollsters anytime soon. So if there are
That
some
camera
pollsters
off.
in this room, my apologies. But I don't think there was any crystal ball.
Yeah.
And I think for companies like ours, you've got to control the things you can control.
right.
We certainly were tracking, we're, like most of America, looking for visibility to the outcome.
It's not a trick question so much as really understanding, you're out there, you see the pain of the consumer as well with regard to inflation and some of the sort of, you're nodding your head. Stephen, what do you think?
Yeah, but you don't know how people vote. I mean, it's unknowable. If anybody, the pollsters, obviously, they polled. What happened isn't what they polled. So, and they're experts at it. What I would say is, no, nobody has a crystal ball. I mean, do we understand how consumers are behaving? Absolutely. Do we understand what we hear from our people? Absolutely. But you don't know what happens when people go into a voting booth.
Yeah, but Diane, we've been talking about this for probably now coming up on 3 years, coming out of the pandemic. And at every earnings call, I talk about the fact that it's a consumer who's been shopping for value. Mm-hmm. They're on a budget. The impact of inflation has impacted their spending ability. They've had to pull back in certain areas. So that message around consumers looking for value every time they shop, we've been talking about that for multiple years now. That's not a surprise. I think we heard some of that feedback during the election. But we've been very focused on making sure we run a great business, we bring great newness, we have the right assortment, but we've got to pay that off with a focus on value. We've been doing that for several years now.
So technology is one of the big themes that every CEO is dealing with, AI, and one of the most valuable components of that is data, sharing data. I'm not going to say if that other brand was up here, Coca-Cola, et cetera, if you would have as much love. I'm sure you do. You love everybody, right? But talk a little bit about that technology question. How much do you share data? How much do you, what do you do in ways that are unique that only the two of you could do that perhaps would be more difficult for some other brands to replicate?
Well, we've made it almost 15 minutes without talking about Gen AI, which is pretty impressive.
You have 7 minutes and 14 seconds.
All right.
Then I'll go back to Robbie Starbuck. No, I'm just kidding.
But the data is really important.
Sure,
the data leads to the insights and the action. So we've got to share data and make sure we're looking at it the same way to make the right decisions on behalf of our collective businesses and for that consumer. So the insights that we can glean from data are really important. And as technology evolves, hopefully we're going to get more and more precise with some of the choices we make.
Can you give me some tactics? I'm going to go to you, Stephen, because everybody would love to work with you, and with you too, but it's different.
I can see them really enjoying working with Stephen.
Something about PepsiCo just sings to me, but I'm just saying it. What advice do you have? Let's get tactical. You've seen partnerships that work well. I'm sure none of them are terrible, but what is your advice in terms of making it something where you want to get on stage together and talk about culture and partnerships?
So there's a couple of things. One is take time to build a relationship. Transparency is your friend. Transparency builds trust. Trust adds speed. In this environment, speed is a competitive advantage. I would also say it's not just Brian and I, right? It's not just Brian and I. It is multifunctional, multi-level. Our guys that go into the store that use the AI to make the order, that's his store-specific order, they have a relationship with the store manager.
Could you say that with every retailer? I'm not going to, again, name other names, but would you say there's a deeper relationship with Target?
I would say there is a very strong relationship with Target, multi-level, multifunctional. There are few that I would say we have that depth and breadth of relationship with.
It does start at store level. And certainly, there's other members of our team that work together every day, but it's also grounded in execution and delivering results. So great trust, a lot of time coming together, building plans, sharing information, but at the end of the day, it's about performance and execution. And that happens with the front line, in front of the customer. So that's where we keep score. But great consumer insights, you can put together great plans, but we're both in a business where ultimately it's all about execution.
Well, and I didn't ask a chance for some of the tactics you have, because again, everybody would love to get more shelf space, a deeper relationship with you. What advice do you have for people nuance, or even are there new types of partnerships that you're looking at? I mean, I'm looking at a very literal product-focused level. There's obviously other types of partnerships, tech, et cetera, that I'm not mentioning here.
I mean, again, Diane, at the end of the day, consumers vote with their feet, now their clicks, and their wallet.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the shelf space is important, but it's got to deliver the right results. So ultimately, it's that consumer, market by market, making sure we do the right thing in California that might look different in Texas, have the right representation in New York City that might look different in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Consumer gets the vote. We've got to make sure we're putting the plans together that please that consumer, but ultimately, the consumer still has their wallet, their footsteps, and now the clicks. That's what really drives results.
Let me put on one other quick hat, which is there's some policy makers here in the audience. Let's give it some quick advice to them as to how they can create a landscape that either helps the consumer but also helps your companies. Any thoughts?
Well, I think it starts with transparency. I mean, both of our companies are better when we've got clarity and certainty. We understand what
I'm
steps
not
to
advice
take.
to the regulators. I'm a regulator. What do you want me to do? How can I help you, Brian and Stephen?
Well, I think in an environment where we've said consumers are looking for value, we've got to find ways to deliver that.
Yeah.
Consumers said time and time again right now, hey, I'm still recovering from the pandemic,
Right.
from 30-year high inflation. I'm trying to make my ends meet. How do we work together to make sure that happens?
Stephen?
I would say we're an agricultural company at our core. I mean, we have 160 plus farmers we work directly with in the U.S. and many others. One, farming is super important to the country, and it will be for a very, very long time, and we need to support them, right? And we spend a lot of time with regulators and our farm partners in farming. I would also say for the regulators that are working in the food space, spend time with us, get to know us, get to know the things we're working on. We really are, we put the consumer at the center of everything we do, and we take making safe food very, very seriously. And so making sure and spend time, and we do, but for anyone that wants to come, to Plano, where we have our R&D for the PepsiCo food business, that'd be awesome.
I've been to Plano. It's a great. Well, one thing I want to end off and then give each of you some quick final thoughts is you're both, and I'm projecting here, but I know it to be true. You're both kind people, and you've built kind cultures. One of the concerns we have looking around the world right now is this a kind country? And how do we, you're reaching consumers obviously on an individual basis and a collective basis. Any advice you have as to how you interact in a time when not everybody's as kind as you are?
Diane, I'm going to come back to the importance of sharing data.
Okay.
I mean, one of the things we do with regulator administrators is we've got a $100 billion plus business.
Yep.
We're in the food business. We sell household essentials. We're a big toy retailer. We sell lots of apparel and home items. We've got a pretty good sense for the pulse of the consumer. And we're always open about sharing what we see. It's one of the roles that we know we play. What's happening with consumers, what's happening in retail, the economy, that data is really important. And I think getting people as close to the front line as possible, where it's really happening, I think it's a really important step.
Empowering and creating a performance culture. So in the time we have left, I'd love to give each of you some final thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Stephen.
I've got nothing. This was great. I really appreciate it.
Robbie Starbucks calls, what do you do?
This is very good. I focus on the consumer, guys. I mean, Brian and I are common in that way. I mean, if we didn't come through the last several years and understand the consumer's the boss, then we got another problem.
The importance of your own culture, right? So let's bring it back to culture again. Talk about your own culture and how that drives performance.
Well, I think culture for us does drive performance. As I said, strategy is important. You've got to have the right capabilities, the right team. But culture keeps that organization churning and moving forward.
Is that happiness? Is it?
No.
I don't think it's happiness, but it's understanding the whys. And I think, if I was going to leave with some advice, it's always important. And I had a meeting with my top 50 leaders just a couple of weeks ago. And we spent a lot of time making sure they understood the why. Yeah. Why do we make certain decisions? Why are we making certain investments? Why is culture so important? And having the patience and the time to talk about the whys, not just the what, is critically important in today's environment.
Perfect. Well, please join me in thanking our two guests here about culture. Really good.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.